Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It's August 8th. It's time for another very big batch of deep space updates, starting with the rocket launches. So we've had four Starlink launches in the last couple of weeks, two from Vandenberg, two from Florida, and the one from Vandenberg, I think it may have launched a couple of Starshield satellites as well. But moving on to the real launches, or the interesting, the differentiated ones, we have on July 26th, the Vega C rocket launching CO3D and microcarb into sun-synchronous orbit from Kourou. Now, CO3D is a four-constellation satellite, which basically is doing high-resolution mapping at like 50-centimeter resolution and using it to produce like 3D maps using stereography for the entire world. So they're going to be producing that. Each of these satellites weighs something like a quarter of a ton. But there's also a small satellite called microcarb, and this is specifically looking at carbon dioxide sinks. They're looking at very small variations in the concentrations of carbon dioxide across the world, and they're trying to find areas where there are, where it's disappearing, right, into things like water and other sources. Sinks, actually, yes. 27th of July, Long March 6A launching Guo Wang. 5 of those satellites, those are polar low Earth orbit satellite constellation, and this was just the first of several this period. So of course, this is constellation that's designed to be somewhat similar to Starlink, 13,000 satellites, but it's sponsored by Chinese government. It may have some other features that Starlink doesn't have. And yeah, so they launched 5 of those on the 27th of July. 29th of July, also from China, Hyperbola 1 launched a satellite called Kungpeng 3. This is a sun-synchronous orbit Earth observation satellite. And it actually represents the return to flight for Hyperbola 1 after a previous failure in July of 2024. 29th of July, Iris down under, yes, Gilmore Space finally got off the ground for about 14 seconds. I have a whole video on that. Unfortunately, they had one of their engines fail almost immediately after takeoff, and then another one fail about 8 seconds later, and then the whole rocket basically performed a vertical touchdown in Australia and, then fell over. So yes, first launch and vertical landing. Unfortunately, the landing was not planned. The payload, by the way, a jar of Vegemite, was in fact recovered, and I believe there is footage of somebody tasting it and verifying that the payload survived. 30th of July, Long March 8A launching 9 Guowang satellites. Again, more of these communication satellites. This is apparently the first time the Long March 8A launched from the Wenchang commercial launch site, which is different from the other launch sites at Wenchang. 30th of July, we had NASA and India working together. The GSLV Mark II launched NISAR, and it's actually the first time the geostationary launch vehicle launched a payload into low Earth orbit, because this is a much bigger satellite than they're normally launching. So this collaboration had NASA providing like the L-band synthetic aperture radar system, and it also had like telecoms, subsystem for the scientific data, a whole bunch of avionics. India provided the S-band radar, which is like a higher frequency radar, and the satellite, the launch bus, and of course the rocket, right? And so this will be able to image the entire Earth in synthetic aperture radar in about 12 days. It has like a 150-mile wide track that it covers. 31st of July, also in China, a Kuaizhou 1A Pro launch. Now, this is built by X-Pace in China, and the last time they attempted to launch a Kuaizhou rocket, the launch mysteriously disappeared from our calendars. Satellite imagery appeared to show that something went wrong, but nobody ever admitted anything. But I'm going to call this a return to flight. So this was launching a satellite for Pakistan, PRSC-S1, I think, which it was built by China. It's an Earth observation satellite for the Pakistan Space Agency. It's supposed to go into sun-synchronous orbit. It's supposed to perform, Earth observation, natural resource management, disaster response, etc., etc. 1st of August, Crew 11 launching our Falcon 9, launching on the Endeavour spacecraft. So it was Zena Cardman, Michael Finke, JAXA's astronaut of Kimya Yui, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov. So The crew of this, we largely have to thank Boeing for this crew, because Zena Cardman was of course supposed to command Crew 9, but had to be pulled from that mission because they needed the seats for the crew of the Starliner. Then Michael Finke and Kim Yu, they had been training to fly on the very first Starliner operational mission, but that is currently disappearing into the distance. So yeah, we all get, these three are all because of Starliner, and of course we have a Russian cosmonaut to fill out the thing. This was also, by the way, the final time that SpaceX will land a booster at Landing Zone 1. So Landing Zone 1 is the first place they actually successfully landed an orbital class booster back in December of 2015. But this is basically in the area covered by Launch Complex 13, and that is now being reactivated to be used by Via Space and Phantom Space at some point. But yeah, SpaceX is going to move their landing pad to a new location. This flight, by the way, also rendezvoused with the station and docked within 15 hours, which is, I believe, a record for the Dragon at this point. They can do it faster, I'm sure, but they're working up to it. 4th of August, Long March 12. Again, launching a bunch of Guowang satellites, this time from Wenchang, the other pad there. 5th of August, Rocket Lab launched QPS SAR-1. Their mission was called The Harvest God Thrives. This launched from Mahia, and it's the 4th of 8 launches which are for this customer. Now, what I'm going to say about this is it was very nice to watch because the onboard cameras were new, they were top-notch. This was absolutely beautiful, and also we got audio from the second stage again, and people kept on telling me, that sounds wrong. That rocket shouldn't be screaming. The rocket sounds like it's screaming.
Stage separation complete. Stage 2 ignition confirmed.
That is what impellers sound like when they're being driven electrically. It was very nice to see this launch, very nice to see them continue. Also, New Shepard 34 launched, and I know a lot of you don't care about New Shepard, but this one I think is worth mentioning because among the crew was someone called Justin Sun. Now, Justin Sun was the mysterious bidder who bid $28 million to fly alongside Jeff Bezos on the first flight, and then he didn't, and they substituted Oliver Damon instead, therefore, youngest person in space at the time. Now, we now know that he probably didn't make it because of legal concerns over coming to the US, because he was being investigated by the SEC and the FBI over various crypto ventures. Earlier this year, he made a very large investment in World Liberty Financial. The SEC has since dropped the case. I'm not saying those are correlated in any way, but Justin is now able to travel to the US, and he took advantage of that to actually get a flight on New Shepard. We also had a preview of the next X-37B flight, OTV-8, which is pretty rare because the Space Force doesn't generally like to talk about the X-37B in advance, but they did tell us that it's going to be testing laser communications payloads, and it's going to have a new quantum inertial sensor, which basically measures, vehicle motions, rotation, acceleration as such, so that it can perform more accurate navigation when it's in a GPS-denied situation, possibly because there's no GPS satellites, or maybe because they're around the moon and they're a long way from GPS satellites. Every spacecraft can use much more accurate inertial sensors, and the US military is making it clear that they want to have the best ones. And NASA also awarded Firefly a new contract under the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. So this is going to be its 4th lunar mission. Blue Ghost 4 is going to be set for 2029. It's also the 5th CLPS order for Firefly because they've got a bunch of payloads and other stuff. But yeah, it's going to have 2 rovers on board. One is going to be NASA's Moon Ranger, and the Canadian Space Agency is going to have a rover of its own. It's going to go to Haworth Crater. And yesterday, or maybe the day before, Firefly went public on the stock market with a symbol of fly. They debuted at something like $74 per share, and I looked up right now, and they're pretty much just a few cents below that. Straight after the launch, the CEO of Firefly, Jason Lil Kim, basically said, "To the moon Which I think is actually appropriate in this case because Firefly have actually demonstrated that they can, in fact, land on the moon, unlike many of the other people that have tried recently. There was a large earthquake up in Kamchatka. There was concern that it did in fact cause a tsunami across the ocean. And while it didn't cause much of an issue where I was, there was some big anomalous currents around docks and things like that. But the SWAT, right, the surface water satellite or whatever, it was able to, this is a satellite that is a collaboration between US and France. It was able to actually see the wave as it passed over the Pacific and they were able to show that the surface of the ocean was something like 18 inches higher about 70 minutes after the tsunami struck. So that's very interesting, very cool that a satellite was actually able to see this very large, low frequency, very small magnitude, but very powerful global event in real time. SpaceX have been testing the hardware for their next flight, and this has really been interesting because, of course, we had that whole incident over at Massey's back on June of 20, where basically a COPV let go and the entire vehicle was destroyed. And there was a lot of discussion about whether they were going to rebuild Massey's test facility to support the V2, which maybe has a limited life, with the V3 Starship coming down the pipeline. So instead, they decided to actually do these tests at the orbital launch mount. They added some modified support hardware. They added an interface to the ground service equipment, not a quick disconnect plate, a slow disconnect plate, I would imagine, which let them fuel the booster or fuel the rocket, and they tested it. And the first test was surprisingly underwhelming because, of course, they have that massive water suppression system designed for 30 plus engines in the first stage of Starship. And they fired one Raptor, which was almost lost in the furious cloud of water spraying up its skirt. There was later a test with all 6 engines, which was marginally more impressive, but it was very cool because they published some amazing footage from underneath the Starship, watching all the engines fire in slow motion. And this is a really nice piece of footage to admire and rewind and watch the adjusting of the Mach diamonds, especially during the engine shutdown sequence right at the end as they're bringing these things down. So yeah, very photogenic piece of footage. Starship is possibly flying before the end of the month. I've said there's 3 weeks left in the month. I would be pretty comfortable saying that it's flying within a month. And we are actually seeing some marine alerts, so it means that they're definitely thinking about launching very soon. I haven't seen any FAA alerts anywhere yet, so there's still some time to go on that. NASA announced the retirement of astronaut Butch Willmore. And Butch was worth noting that he was the commander of the Starliner test flight, but he is one of the few astronauts with diverse experience in spacecraft. So he's flown in 4 different launch vehicles, although he only descended in 1. So he flew on the Space Shuttle, he's flown Soyuz, Starliner, and then he had to land in a Dragon capsule. He also, technically, the space station is also another spacecraft. It's autonomous, it can adjust its orbit. So I'm going to say 5 different spacecraft. And that also means that he's flown with all the different spacesuits, like the Shuttle Aces suit, the EMU EVA suit, the SOCOL suit, the Dragon, whatever, IVA suit, and the Starliner suit. So, he's had a whole lot of diverse experience with that. So yeah, he's only flown in 3 different flights. So STS-129, Soyuz TMA-14, which was Expedition 41 and 42, and of course the Starliner test flight. And yeah, he was the commander of Expedition 42. That was back when NASA was cool and was making these sci-fi themed posters for the expedition. And since Expedition 42, they had to pay homage to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So he is there in the middle playing Arthur Dent with his towel and his cup of tea, and there's Samantha Cristoforetti off at the side. Yeah, I'm sure he was thinking "Don't panic" when he was having trouble with the thrusters on Starliner. Okay, so Sean Duffy is acting administrator on NASA. We weren't sure what was going to happen in the last time we talked about this because it was so new. Well, he's made some big changes almost right away. So first of all, he's made like a big set of changes to the commercial LEO destinations program. Now, this is the plan to produce a commercial successor to the International Space Station. And he very quickly signed this change, which will essentially say that instead of going from the current sort of Space Act, brainstorming session, they would originally go into a fixed price contract where NASA would pay X amount of money to fly this station. Instead, they're more going to go into, okay, we're going to keep giving a bunch of you guys money, but you're going to have to launch the station and you won't get the contract until you're actually in orbit with a station that satisfies the requirements. I mean, that's roughly what's happening. And this is because there's now a $4 billion shortfall in the planned funding versus the funding that they were originally promised when this program was dreamed up. So what's interesting is the baseline requirement for supporting NASA is now 4 astronauts for 1 month. And that is a whole lot more meager than what we had previously looked at. But it does, however, fit almost exactly into what VAST has been doing down in LA. They were building the world's simplest space station, a single module launched on a single rocket with a Dragon spacecraft which would dock and provide support. They were looking at like Space Hotel originally, but they are incredibly well placed to take advantage of this project. Now, it is also interesting that with 4 astronauts for 1 month, that could very well change NASA's. Basically, NASA has had an astronaut on orbit for the last 25 years. And so by the end of the ISS, they will have had an astronaut on orbit for 3 decades in a row. If they are only going to be launching astronauts for 1 month, then we could very well see an end to a continuous presence of NASA astronauts in low Earth orbit. Now, China will continue flying their space station, and I'm sure that just for the sheer political value, if they see a gap, they will continue flying. So humanity will have people in space on an ongoing basis going forward, but NASA may actually step away from having a continuous presence if this continues the way it's looking. Another big, bold move by Sean is where they announced that we are going to put a nuclear reactor on the surface of the moon to support a NASA moon base, which is, kind of impressive. A 100 kilowatt reactor would do a lot to support a potential moon base during a lunar night, long lunar night at the North Pole or South Pole. But we're kind of still lacking the plans for the rest of the moon base. So, I feel that this is like step 7 of 10, that we should probably get steps 1, 2, and 3 sorted out first. But yeah, look, that's a big deal that they would be claiming space on the moon using this. And also, the office of NASA, Sean or whatever, they have confirmed that they have in fact picked a space shuttle to move to Houston, but they won't tell us why, which one, or whatever. Now, this is this bill where to throw a bunch of funding at NASA, they included this $75 million line item that said you will move a space shuttle, or a flown space vehicle that has carried people, didn't specify a vehicle by name, and it had to be owned by NASA. They will move it to Texas because Texas screwed up its initial application to get a space shuttle, and they felt that they should have got one without trying. Well, anyway, it sounds like Sean is going to make sure they get something. They haven't named which one. The problem is turning out that there are 3 space shuttles, and only one of them is owned by NASA. The Discovery has been given to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, which is not part of NASA. It's not actually part of the federal government. It's because it's got a lot of funding from elsewhere. So NASA doesn't own that. The Endeavour is in California. That's owned by the California Science Center and its thing. Atlantis, I believe, is still owned by NASA. It's displayed at Kennedy. So that one is more likely to go. But as I've said previously, if you're looking for a spacecraft which has flown in space, has carried people, and is associated with Texas, according to the exact language of the bill, they should get a New Shepard capsule, which flew from Texas and it carried Katy Perry to space. Wouldn't Houston deserve that I mean, $75 million. I think Ted Cruz deserves that capsule. Anyway, China. China, they have been testing their Lanyu. I think that's it. Lanyu. This pronunciation is going to be terrible. But look, just look at the pictures. This is their lunar lander. This is a 1-to-1 scale model working version of their lunar lander, which they are testing on this absolutely massive test rig. It needs to be this big because they have to fly on cables to essentially offset the Earth's gravity so they can fly this thing around and verify that it can actually land on the moon at 1/6 gravity. This is obviously very different from the Apollo module. In fact, a lot of people looked at this and said, that looks too small to be a lunar lander. Look at the size of the Apollo lander. Well, there is a significant difference here because this is the final landing and ascent stage. There is a deorbit stage which reduces the velocity, removes most of the orbital velocity, and then that gets dropped, and then this performs the final landing. So it is much smaller because it's already ditched most of the propellant that will be used. This is supposed to carry 2 astronauts, a rover, a bunch of other experiments, and it's obviously supposed to be able to return to orbit. You'll notice that unlike the Apollo lander, it has 4 smaller thrusters on it with a bunch of RCS thrusters rather than one big engine. Like, these are still running on hypergolics. You can tell from the horrific orange smoke. I don't think there was anyone nearby when that was flying. But yeah, you can see that they are moving forwards on their plans to put humans on the moon. In Scotland, Skyrora has got a license from the UK's Civil Aviation Authority to operate its suborbital Skylark L rocket. This is the first time a UK company, I believe, has been licensed to operate a space vehicle from the UK. So this Skyrora L is basically a like 2.5-ton sounding rocket. It uses high-test peroxide, kerosene, and it will be operated from the Saxavord spaceport up in Shetland, which I may get to visit one day, having looked at trying to do it last time. Rocket Lab had its quarterly financial result call, and one of the highlights for space nerds in this is a video of a full duration burn of their Archimedes engine. It's a critical milestone in the development of the Neutron launch vehicle. It's like another reusable launch vehicle. It'll be running from the Wallops launch facility. This is running on methane and liquid oxygen. It's a staged combustion engine. They apparently operated at up to 102% power at NASA's Stennis Space Flight Center. So this is good. This means they may well be on course to operate and launch Neutron by the end of this year, so that will be great. Also, another sort of unrelated, really neat piece of video is Peter Beck sharing a short video from The Harvest God Thrives, and he tweets out, "Okay, this may be my tweet of the year so far. Here's the kick stage doing a cheeky flyby past the new Stage 2 camera." And yes, I said those cameras were great, and it's great to see them catching this in space. Okay, from new space to old space, well, Tory Bruno had a big conference call because Vulcan is getting ready to fly its first government payload, USSF 106. This will be carrying a navigation test satellite up to geostationary orbit, and this has been a long time coming, and Tory is really anxious to make a point of selling Vulcan as a launch vehicle that can adapt to all the various needs and everything. So he talked a lot, by the way, about SMART, right? That's the smart reuse technology, where back when SpaceX was starting to land boosters, ULA thought their whole plan would be, let's just save the really expensive part of the rocket, the engines. They're using these 2 large BE-4 engines, and basically they can't throttle down deeply enough to land this entire booster. Their whole thing is they will just chop off the rear using, like, separation bolts, and then it will land with a reusable heat shield and get recovered. This does help them in some ways because it means they don't need to expand the rocket as much as possible. SpaceX Falcon 9 has a pretty significant propellant penalty so that they can do the boost back and landing. Vulcan won't need this. It will have some mass penalty, but it could potentially keep them competitive in the market. They're also going to be launching, they said that they'll be launching twice a month, and that will include a bunch of Kuiper payloads, I expect. And they said they're about 70% complete, 75% complete with their Vandenberg launch site, which again would be really nice to go down and visit that. I may be looking at some more free time coming in the near future. But they did say that this was delayed partly because they couldn't find like specialists that would operate with the equipment, and specialist equipment was unavailable, etc., etc. Okay, and some late developing news. We've just heard that astronaut legend Jim Lovell has died at age 97. He was the oldest of the Apollo astronauts still living, and his space career is legacy. Prior to being an astronaut, he was with the US Navy. He was at the test pilot school. He flew everything. He tried to get into the original batch of NASA astronauts, but he had some biosignatures that were out of spec. So he ended up getting selected in the next group, the next 9. He would then fly on Gemini 7, Gemini 12. Then he would be on Apollo 8, one of the first 3 people to fly around the moon. They didn't land, but they were the first humans to see the Earth rise over the lunar surface. After returning, he continued to train for the next mission, Apollo 13, the mission for which he is most famous. And we all know that Apollo 13 didn't go according to plan, but he led the mission. They flew around the moon one more time. He's the only person to have gone to the moon twice and never landed. And after returning, he did eventually retire from NASA. But yeah, he is, as I said, he's gone west, as we might say, or returned to the stars, depending upon how you put it. But yeah, a legend has gone. So that is my roundup of the various news. It's been busy. We're going to have some more launches in the coming future. We're looking forward, obviously, to USSF 106. But in the next day or so, we're hoping to see Crew 10 come back and land in California. Now, this one, it should be a daytime landing, which means that we probably won't see any like re-entry flare this time. We might be able to hear like sonic booms if you're standing in the right place at the right time. Pay attention to that, whatever, especially if you're down in SoCal, because you're going to have front row seats to this whole recovery show. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.